What makes Football Manager fun? It's something I've been thinking about a lot after Football Manager 26 landed dead on arrival, and it's a deceptively tricky question to answer. More mainstream game genres have tomes written about their game design and satisfying gameplay loops available at your fingertips, along with countless in-depth interviews with the creators of the most influential games of each genre, designers who are considered auteurs making key decisions which shape the future of gaming. When it comes to Football Manager and the sporting simulator or sandbox, you're relegated to discussions on fan forums about the game, which occasionally, almost accidentally, veer messily into discussion on game design by way of another topic, along with the occasional appearance of the current figurehead of the series, Miles Jacobson, participating in interviews where game design is rarely broached directly, while being at the mercy of both the quality of question and response. I think a lot of this comes from an incorrect assumption that Football Manager, as a game, arrives fully formed as a result of its genre. It's a football simulator game. It models football realistically. Job done. Shove it over in the corner with the walking simulators and the graphic novels into the space of games, which aren't really games in the minds of the average gamer, but rather something else entirely. That glosses over the hundreds of small but incredibly impactful design decisions that go into making Football Manager work as a game, which make it something which is fun to play. Sure, Football Manager gets to model itself off of football, using that as a framework to build its systems, but Call of Duty or Arma get to model themselves after real-life events too, and nobody discredits the importance of game design in those titles. Take something as tiny and as fundamental to the experience as submitting a transfer bid for a player. I think even veterans of Football Manager will take this aspect of the game for granted, as just sort of existing, as it always has done. How else could it even work? But it can be used to show how even the most minute design decisions can completely change the player's mindset, strategy, and approach to the game. In older Football Manager and Championship Manager games, making an offer works in one way. Upon identifying a player you want to buy, you can place an offer guided by a player's attributes and a transfer value that is often quite far from the reality of what will be accepted. Then, unless the player in question has a release clause, the selling team will get back to you with their decision. This response will come back in an indeterminate amount of time, but usually within a week or so, at which point they'll either accept the bid, offer their own renegotiation, or outright reject it, sending you back to the start of the cycle. Whereas in the newer games, you still have that option. By pressing the Make an Offer button, you can essentially engage with that older form of transfer negotiations, but there's also a new button, Suggest Offer. Pressing this leads to an immediate negotiation with the selling club. You offer, they counter-offer, until you either meet on an agreeable price for both parties, they say they need some time to think about it, which transfers you back into the old gameplay loop, or they can be so offended by what they perceive to be a lowball offer that they lock you out of making an offer for an indeterminate amount of time. This was a tiny change, something which has generated next to no discussion online once it was implemented, but there are very real, big effects on the gameplay of a Football Manager from a change this small. In the old system, your transfer bids getting rejected was a very real possibility, and one which could seriously set you back, as another team may be able to snap up the player you wanted badly in that time that your offer was deemed not good enough, or the transfer window may slam shut if the offer didn't go through in time. This meant that you had to give a lot of thought as to whether or not to throw in a few extra million to guarantee one of the offers for the central midfielder that you really need goes through, weighing up whether you're confident your bid will be accepted, or if you need to place offers for another 2 or 3 backup options just in case, which would mean more scouting, ranking of options, consideration of values, etc. With the new system of direct, instant negotiation, you gain more control and certainty over the fate of your transfers thanks to the way the game is balanced. And it's pretty clear the primary method that you're meant to use for negotiations, or the primary method most people do use, is that Suggest Offer button. So now, once you identify a player that you'd like to sign under the new transfer offer system, You can nearly instantaneously find out exactly how much money you'll have to pay to get them, and then lock that in. There's still some tension in avoiding being locked out of negotiations entirely by submitting an offer which is way too low, but with more accurate asking prices informed by your scouting reports, another interlocking game design decision which changes how the game plays, this consideration for whether or not your offer will be accepted plays far less of a factor. Now, is one of those systems better than the other? That's up for debate. There are benefits and trade-offs to both systems. I personally slightly prefer the older approach, with the tension and the extra decision-making that it brought, but that's the beauty and the art of game design. In an attempt to create a gamified system that represents football transfer negotiations, the very act of adding one button for more instant feedback on your offer completely changes the game and how the player approaches it. It's also interesting to note that one approach is not necessarily more realistic than the other. The biggest misconception I see in discussions about Football Manager is that the end goal of the genre is to create the most realistic game possible. This is something which I'm going to talk about more later in another video, but any level of analysis reveals that Football Manager is not trying to be realistic. And more importantly for us right now, realism is not what makes Football Manager fun. I scoured thread after thread of self-reported reasons for why people say they like Football Manager. And I think they can be fairly neatly divided into a couple of categories. First of all, satisfying choices that matter. This is perhaps the most straightforward and obvious appeal for a game like Football Manager. Picking what tactics you want to use, deciding what transfer targets you're going to try and bring in, or your starting 11 for the big final. Legendary game designer Sid Meier, creator and designer of Civilization, and the much better spin-off Alpha Centauri, says that a game is a series of interesting decisions. Football as a sport lends itself to a lot of these meaningful decision-making situations, and gamifying those systems, somewhat naturalistically, creates a series of gameplay loops where you're making decisions of varying importance which feel meaningful every game, every week, and every transfer window. Looking at Football Manager through this lens helps to illustrate why some parts of the game work so well, and why others feel incredibly shallow, like large swathes of filler content. It's inarguable that Football Manager's database and scouting network are their crowning glory. It's what helped to distinguish and establish the series, and this was shown especially well during the split from Eidos Interactive, where keeping access to that database proved to be more valuable than the brand recognition of the old Championship Manager name. The database, realistic finances, and player values create the sandbox for the player to operate and make decisions as they see fit. Combine that with a series of interlocking game mechanisms in scouting, transfer negotiations, contract negotiations, and the transfer window becomes a really complex, near infinite set of decisions. As a result, you get the satisfaction as a player that your choices mattered and were impactful, leading to it being the part of a save that a vast majority of the player base looks forward to the most when actively engaging in a save. On the other hand, you have game systems like the team talks, intermediaries, or player shouts. These just feel shallow. You'll see the same options hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout a save. Picking the correct option is usually trivial, and there is nearly always no reason to think about the use of these systems for more than a second or two. Another game design titan and noted yacht enjoyer Gabe Newell, when talking about game design, stated that you have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to your choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact. Obviously, it's easier to build those kinds of impactful choices into some parts of the game than in others. That's one of the difficulties of basing your game so closely off of something in real life. In choosing to add some of the more obscure features of football management into the game, then you have to either find meaningful ways for the player to interact with them, or have them add to the verisimilitude of the game world in order to contribute to the second category of fun that Football Manager provides. That's the ability to roleplay. This is the more confounding aspect of Football Manager's appeal for those on the outside. It's easy enough to look at someone playing Football Manager and go, oh, they enjoy football. They like choosing what formation their little virtual players run around in, treating it as a strategy or a puzzle sort of game. But it's harder for an outsider to wrap their head around the stories of players dressing up in a suit for the Champions League final, the endless amount of books, playthroughs and blogs created down through the years, or the way you look fondly back on the stars of the past like Cherno Samba or Freddie Adu. So many of the stories you hear people tell about Football Manager have little to do with their tactics, subs, or training schedules. When people actually talk about the parts of their save which they remember, that they enjoyed the most, you see that Football Manager is often at its best as a role-playing game in the truest sense of the word. There's a lot that feeds into that side of the fun of the game. Again, a lot of it stems from and is informed by real life. It might be hard to pinpoint exactly why sports hold such cultural significance in our lives, but the storylines and the drama are undoubtedly a massive part of it. This part of the game is actually where I think Football Manager's attention to detail and the elements of the game which are more realistic helps them the most. Not in the nitty-gritty tactical adjustments as a manager, or the representation of football on the pitch, but the immersion into the game world. Anything that comes across as blatantly cheesy or unrealistic can seriously harm the feel of the game, and their approach cuts out most of those issues. The robust and comprehensive database gives people who are already fans of football a natural jumping off point for storytelling. Nearly every new player starts out by picking their own team and playing out a little alternative universe, getting rid of players you've always thought are overrated, or seeing what it would be like if you just threw Messi onto the team. While the number of leagues, with their detailed and varying rules, gives players an endless number of situations to drop themselves into, new scenarios to play out, and natural variants with every new save, even when the underlying gameplay is all the same, making the whole experience feel more authentic, novel, and challenging, even though it's an extremely easy game when all things are considered. You really can get lost in the world of Football Manager. If you wanted to get extreme, you could nearly describe it as an open-world football game. It may sound strange, the dichotomy of a Far Cry up against a fancy Excel spreadsheet of Football Manager, but at the end of the day, it kind of is. You have the freedom to go anywhere within the world of professional and semi-professional football to make the choices you see fit. In many ways, it's a much more naturalistic, open-ended game than something like Assassin's Creed, which is tied down by its plot and the need to revolve around the player character, where your options essentially boil down to who you want to slash or stalk, or whatever quests the developer has coded into the game for you to enjoy. In Football Manager, you may not have a digital landscape to walk through, but a scroll through a random team squad 15 years into the future can take you all over the footballing world in just a few clicks. A footballing landscape to explore and play around with in lieu of fancy 3D graphics. This kind of appeal the Football Manager has is a major differentiator from a lot of other sports and sports management games, which often struggle to even save stats between years, never mind offering hundreds of leagues to play in and scouting thousands of players. It's also one of the things that was identified by the creators of the series, Paul and Oliver Collier, early on, showing it's not something which came about by accident. This is a quote from Miles Jacobson in an interview with PC Gamer in 2017. The thing that Ove said, and it's always stuck with me, was that they were trying to create a football universe. Everyone else was creating a football game, and it might reset at the end of every year, so it didn't matter. It didn't really interact with other teams. They didn't really have players apart from a basic transfer market, which would come through once a week when you'd be offered one player. But he said they didn't care whether a human was playing or a computer manager was playing, the game would carry on because it would be a living, breathing world. That's what we've always tried to do ever since then. This is why there's a whole subset of Football Manager fans who just enjoy the experience of setting up a custom rule set or database with the editing tool and simulating forward throughout the years to watch what happens. A little digital diorama to watch and observe. Or for a more modern example, a set of viewers on YouTube who can get invested in a save, or in those experiments where the video creator simulates forward X amount of seasons without even touching the game themselves. Even the most hardcore of managers and tactical tinkerers Can't resist going back and looking at the career of the regen who got you promoted to the Premier League, looking to see where he went after you decided you needed to cash in on him for the good of your squad. You just don't get that kind of behaviour in a game that lacks that narrative element and the ability to get you immersed and invested in the world it's portraying. Even the goal for your save is ever-shifting and self-set. You're given nothing to aim for except for the very loose board expectations, all of which, outside of your expected league position, can be readily ignored, allowing you to set your own goals and rule set to your liking, experience, and challenge level, which goes hand in hand with good role-playing. How often do you hear about an RPG having too restrictive of a character creator, storyline path, or background for the playable character? In Football Manager, the only requirement is that you're involved in the world of football somehow. In researching for these videos, I undertook a series of saves with different goals to stress test and dive in depth to a number of the systems, which led to glorious character creations such as Bobby George, whose fine jewellery addiction led to him amassing £1 billion debt, which he had to pay off through his management of Stoke FC as quick as humanly possible. I also find it absolutely fascinating that many of the most commonly cited reasons for players struggling with the 2026 release of Football Manager fall under this category. I'm not going to be talking too much about FM26 in this video series, as I want the focus to be on what I now consider to be essentially a completed vision for a game and a game development cycle in FM24, one that I can look back on and judge the good and the bad parts of in totality, in the same way that you can look back on FM 2008, for example, as the last game of the 2D cycle. But FM26's failure does show just how fragile this sense of immersion and the joy of role-playing can be. Some slightly clunkier user interface and user experience design, and the removal of a couple of seriously fringe features like a best ever 11 for your team can result in a loss of the will to roleplay and immersion that is enough to completely yank players out of the experience. And going back to the realism and game design discussion from earlier for a brief moment, it also confirms that the joy of role-playing and the fun of the game doesn't inherently come from Football Manager being a game about football and simply being the most realistic depiction of football possible, driven home by the fact that it looks like the game engine, the tactics, and the football graphics are better than ever before in FM26. Good game design is a necessary ingredient in making a good football management game. Now, if you wanted to leave it with those two distinctions of what makes Football Manager fun, it would be adequate. Most people's enjoyment can be explained neatly enough by some mixture of those two factors. But there's one more thing that's worth really focusing in on. That's how many parts of the game lean into variable ratio reinforcement design, something which you may recognize more readily from the name of the apparatus which defined it, the Skinner box. This kind of design, whether intentionally inserted or not, is the secret sauce, the umami, that little extra spice which sets it apart from the countless other sports management games, helping it to outlast any competitors that entered the space. The super quick rundown of the Skinner or operant conditioning box is that you stick a rat in a box with a big old lever it can push for some food. If you give out food after a set number of presses, say 10, then the rat will only start smashing that like button once he's hungry. But if you give the food after a random number of presses, say from 1 to 50 presses, then the rat will row like a historically inaccurate Norwegian World Cup celebration, going buck wild on that lever, because every push might just be the next treat and a nice tasty release of dopamine to the brain. That randomized reward schedule is variable ratio reinforcement design. It's the psychology that makes everything from slot machines and social media to loot boxes and Diablo so addictive, with their irregular dopamine payouts and loot drops. So looking at that list, it might not seem like a natural fit for a game like Football Manager, which is heavy with planning and strategy, yet it's a massive part of what makes the game so compelling to those who get hooked. Some of it is again inherent in the sport itself. When you're watching football, you never know if the next attack is the one that's going to be a goal. Similarly, you don't know if the next key highlight that comes up is going to be the chance that finally breaks the computer's low block and stops you from being FM'd. But what separates Football Manager is how much it leans into this in its game design. I think about how a game franchise like Madden deals with player development, where you're essentially leveling up your players once they reach a certain amount of experience. Whereas I genuinely don't think I can count how many times I'll check in on my best wonder kid throughout a season of Football Manager. The receptors in my brain popping off when I see a slate of green arrows. The reward for my hard work of pressing away at the spacebar, the lever for my very own personal, high-tech Skinner box. Sometimes when I'm playing and I'm not quite paying full attention, I can catch myself checking in on the same player 2 or 3 times in the same game week, when nowhere near enough time has passed to functionally change anything. It's a remarkably efficient way of getting the player invested, hits of dopamine which just keep coming and coming as you go through a save. Even though I know, in my years of playing the game, that the functional difference between a player having 12 or 14 composure is non-existent. I just can't help myself from cycling through my squad, wonderkid after wonderkid, to chase the most beautiful attributes page I can achieve. It's like Borderlands drops and Pokemon training on steroids once you're invested in the process. They could easily have designed it so that the end of the month is the day where all your players progress, and it's neatly summed up in an inbox item. But leaving it as this more nebulous, random, and constantly changing system results in far more of the pleasure that I get out of the game than I'd care to admit. And I know I'm not alone in that feeling. Just look at the number of those post your best regen ever type threads and posts on social media that you see all the time. People love showing off their virtual numbers they've accumulated on their virtual players. Football Manager layers in so many of these systems where other sports management games do not. As you go through a save, you've got the events which happened at fixed points, which you can always look forward to, the transfer windows, the start of the business end of the season, the games that happen from week to week. But the inbox screen is the most important page in all of Football Manager for this reason, because it propels you between these fixed events, keeping you playing, with a message in your inbox from your scout that he's found a 5-star wonderkid in Kazakhstan, your collection of new players from the youth intake, a message from your coach that the youngster you've been playing has had his potential increased, a big offer for a player on your transfer list, or the news that your club is being taken over by a billionaire. Nothing is guaranteed to happen, but anything could happen with just one more press of the spacebar. It would be so easy for Sports Interactive to have designed the game in a way that didn't emphasize these moments. Instead, the whole game feeds them straight into your inbox, dopamine hit after dopamine hit. It's just nice that it hasn't been intentionally placed to hack your brain into selling some loot boxes and pay-to-win garbage, being used instead to keep you at your computer for just one more game. But you can see why the design principle is so effective and how it can be used maliciously, paying to have your next scouting assignment return 100% more reports, or boosting your youth intake on your next go around. Not that I think they'd survive the outrage that would create given the kind of audience they've cultivated. Those are the 3 elements which bring nearly all of the enjoyment out from a save of Football Manager. Different parts of the game create their fun in different ways, but the best parts of the game, at least in my opinion, are located directly in the middle of the Venn diagram of the 3. Take developing a player from your youth intake. You have that hit of randomness at the start when you get a player worth developing in your youth intake, and his development is quasi-random as outlined earlier. That randomness of the development is influenced by the decisions you make, letting your input feel meaningful rather than it simply being a matter of passing time. What individual focus to put him onto, where to loan him, when to start integrating him into the first team, and whether to stick with him as he goes through a rough patch. All along the way, you'll be building a storyline in your head of this player's development, his debut, his struggles, the massive injury he has to overcome, and so on. It's also interesting to note that enjoyment of real-life football is not a requirement for any of this enjoyment of Football Manager. Sure, it lowers the barrier to entry, but there's a reason I've seen so many stories of people with barely a passing interest in football getting absolutely absorbed and sucked into Football Manager saves, in a way that I don't think is possible with something like PES or FIFA. At its heart, it's a good game, not just a good football game. I made this the first part of my video series because I think it establishes a good framework to move forward with. I really don't want to be the kind of person who makes any kind of video that is simply a series of nitpicks. My nightmare in life is to become that dork from The Simpsons, remarking, "Boy, I do hope somebody got fired for that blunder." I hope attempting to lay out what is at the heart of my enjoyment of Football Manager will help to mould my future analysis, praise, and criticism into a more productive shape, while being an interesting topic in its own right, as an under-discussed part of Football Manager's legacy. To close things out, a few extra quotes which I liked and wanted to include, which I think helped back up my points, but couldn't quite work into the script. Let me know if you have any thoughts about anything I laid out down below. From Why I Play Football Manager, The Story of Shane, The Wonder Kid Paul by Tom Hatfield. This is the thing that makes Football Manager special. The fact that despite all the precise stats and complex tactics, there's an element of randomness inherent in the match engine. I don't know what sorcery makes it possible, but nothing is quite certain in a game of Football Manager. Sometimes a goalkeeper plays a blinder and stops your team short. Sometimes that world-class striker develops an attitude problem and just doesn't work out. And sometimes, just sometimes, an unknown teenager leaves 3 veteran defenders trailing in his wake before slotting the ball away like he's been doing it all his life. From Why Football Manager Just Keeps Winning by Chris Allnutt. According to Sports Interactive, the average playtime for an active PC player on the previous release was around 600 hours. When I ask how the studio strikes a balance between authenticity and fun, Jacobson counters that it's not necessarily meant to be fun, only half joking. I equate FM more to a hobby than necessarily fun. It's a world that people escape into from their normal world. From Gabe Newell in the Half-Life 25th anniversary documentary, you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody says, "That's not realistic." And you're like, okay, explain to me why that's interesting. Because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff, I have to go to the grocery store to buy, and I have never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we came up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions. The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, and nothing happens, to me it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it's like, to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of yes, you are making choices, yes, you are progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made, otherwise it loses any sort of impact. From Just Fun and Games, a sociological consideration of fun in video games by Garry Crawford and Tom Brock. Video games provide us with a distorted, rationalized version of the world. They offer us an attractive fantasy of a world where effort directly leads to reward, cutting out the unfairness and structural inequality of a wider society. Hence, not only do we enjoy and have fun with games that replicate work, because working all the time is what we're told will make us happy, but we find fun in games that eradicate the complexities and unfairness of the wider world, that give us a greater sense of control over our destiny, and a sense of achievement when we succeed.